Lots to begin with here this morning, and I appreciate the contributions of each of you. And clearly, there is agreement that technology is how we address these issues of increased emissions or worldwide global emissions. It's technology, but as you have pointed out very, very clearly, Ms. Ladislaw, you can have all the great technology, but if we don't have the deployment out there, we haven't even started to leave the house yet. So how we make that leap is part of our discussion here. The other thing that I have underlined from your testimony that I really appreciate is this recognition that we need to be all in on all of the above. And when we determine here in Congress through our policies, or perhaps our policies by default, that we're going to favor one over another by way of subsidies or credits or what happens, as you point out, Mr. Bryce, with state policies that say we want to have renewables, except we don't want your kind of renewable. That's where we start to get in our own way here. So the question that I would pose to you all as a panel is, there's no shortage of good ideas with the technologies that are out there, but we are stumbling in the deployment end of it. What should our role be here in the Congress to help facilitate to a better level this deployment? And I am all in on what Senator Alexander has proposed in terms of increasing the funding for research and development and doubling up on ARPA-E. But outside of the obvious, what more do we need to be doing? You've indicated, Mr. Sandilow, that we need to be focusing on longer-term visioning so that investors then are interested in coming to the table. But help me out. Let's have this conversation. Go ahead. Anyone can jump in here.
Well, I'll offer just a couple ideas. I mean, I think, you know, there was a Wall Street Journal that had most of the prominent economists saying that the carbon tax is probably the most efficient way of trying to send that signal to market. And I would say most of the people that I talk to in the energy field and somewhat agree, right? I mean, I've had people tell me, you know, CCS wouldn't actually be terribly hard if you had a high enough carbon price to at least, you know, be trying more of it in the field, right? And so, however, those economists aren't in Congress, right? That's not that they don't exist here, and therefore you
point about politics.
Yeah. So, I think that, you know, if you look at like just policies like a clean energy standard, most states have renewable portfolio standards. A lot of them are revising them now. They know what they are. They know what they do. You could have a federal level clean energy standard that tries to build on that. That says, well, let's try and you could probably do most of the work that you need in the electric power sector in terms of decarbonizing through a policy like a clean energy standard. So there are lots and lots of performance-based energy standards that you can put in place that say, I don't care how you get there, but here's the target, here's the goal. And we apply some of those standards in our innovation programs, right? I mean, supporting those national standards. We just need them echoed out there in the market as well.
I completely agree with Ms. Ladislaw. You know, these clean energy standards or renewable portfolio standards have been very successful at the state level. Applying that at the federal level would be a big step forward. In some ways, even an easier step could be eliminating fossil fuel subsidies. I mean, why are we subsidizing fuels that are polluting the atmosphere? And if we could get rid of those, that would provide a level playing field for some of these clean energy technologies. And then I would point to the point I made about planning in my testimony. You know, it's striking to me, some European governments, some Asian governments, they set 5, 10, 15-year targets on these long-term issues, and then they adjust as they go forward. In this country, we celebrate it when we pass a one-year appropriations bill. I think we can do better, and we should work to have 5, 10, 15-year targets. The Department of Energy has tremendous expertise to help with that and really do long-term planning in a way that we don't today.
You know, I would just add, sorry. I was just going to add to that, you know, a green grid is largely an economics problem, frankly, not a technical problem. we can get to, 10, 20, 30, 40%, whatever the standard that we need, whatever the climate change science tells us we need to do, we can get to that standard. The market can get there using economic principles. And that really does mean choice, and then going through and creating the kind of durable market structure that will actually attract private capital. I know there's always a temptation to want to subsidize and to use tax dollars, but really we will be much better if we have a public-private partnership where we have a durable market structure that drives that kind of private investment. You really want to unleash that and bring it into the market. And again, that comes back to having that nice, solid market. And unfortunately, we've seen really a retreat from markets, as if somehow markets and green outcomes are incompatible. And so I would love to see this committee sort of go at that issue head on.
Doctor?
If I could just add, energy infrastructure lasts for 50, 60, 70 years. We have to think about this as the 21st century game. And we have to take the lead on this because the rest of the world also has to change. Given that, coming back to the planning, the long-term planning, I completely agree with some of the things that Mr. Bryce was talking about, and I've outlined that in my written testimony. This whole idea of looking at 1936 Rural Electrification Act, if he could create a similar kind of thing to get the clean energy services deployed into our cities and towns and villages, that will require the federal, state, and local governments to come together and streamline the permitting and the regulatory process to expedite it. We need to figure out how to get private capital into the energy system. And there is Senator Coons and others have put a Master Limited Parity Act, which will essentially put everything on the level playing field. Talking about the price on carbon, where markets work, they are efficient. We could either have a direct price on carbon or an indirect price. Whether it's a clean energy standard, it's an indirect price on carbon. But we need to accelerate that. Technology innovation is not enough. We need the market pull. But there are places where the markets don't work. And we know there are market failures in energy efficiency. That's why we have appliance standards. That's why we have clean fuel efficiency standards. And I would go full force in creating not just building codes, which are for design, but actual performance-based standards for the buildings across the United States. And I think if you could do that and provide the infrastructure to deliver these solutions, I think that's the transition path that I see.
Very good. Mr. Bryce, you're the only one that hasn't spoken. We're out of time, but go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. My quick comment would be, what is the priority? I'm sorry, I'm a one-trick pony here. It's a sense of urgency on the deployment of nuclear energy at scale. The United States is not the world. The coal sector globally, in the global electric sector, coal's share of electricity generation has stayed at about 40% for 30 years. What can supplant coal in this in developing countries as baseload form of electricity generation? It would be nuclear, but the U.S. has to play in that game, and right now that game is being dominated by the Russians, the Chinese, the Indians, and the South Koreans, and that is where the U.S., I think, could make a long-term, lasting contribution, but it would have to be done with urgency, and it was going to require a significant federal involvement.
Thus, the need for NELA. Senator Manchin.